So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Rima Shaib, and I'm an implementation consultant here at Snyk. So as an implementation consultant, I collaborate closely with our customers to understand their tech stack, security objectives, and success metrics for their Snyk deployment in order to provide them with customized Snyk deployment options. So a primary goal for most of our customers, and especially my customers in the last quarter, is to integrate Snyk in their pipelines. So today we're going to be focusing on how you can do just that in Jenkins. Some general housekeeping. So this presentation is being recorded and it will be emailed to you. Number two, the recording will also be available on YouTube. Like I mentioned, please introduce yourself in the chat. And then lastly, feel free to ask questions throughout the session in the chat as well. I'll start to answer them at the end of our session. All right, and the agenda for this meeting includes a discussion on how Snyk integrates across your SDLC and a common Snyk workflow for integrating Snyk into Jenkins, a review of the prerequisites and configurations of our Jenkins plugin, and then your options for deploying Snyk in Jenkins and starting to run scans for the full platform, excluding cloud. And then lastly, additional resources that you can leverage to set up your own environment. All right, so we'll start by just reviewing and discussing how Snyk works in your Jenkins workflow. So this is just an overview of the different ways that you can implement Snyk across your SDLC. But like I mentioned, we're going to discuss the workflow for integrating Snyk in your Jenkins pipeline and using automated Snyk tests to help prevent vulnerabilities from passing through your build processes. So when you first implement Snyk in your pipeline, we recommend using only the Snyk monitor command and configuring the plugin to the Jenkins plugin to not fail the build. And this is if you're earlier on in your deployment, and it's because a lot of projects will have vulnerabilities when you're first scanning them. And after you set Snyk to fail the build, every build might fail because of Snyk, which might cause problems with your development teams being quickly overwhelmed with failure messages. So at the beginning, use the Snyk monitor command to first expose results without disrupting processes. So the first workflow we have here involves not breaking the build. So a developer merges their code to their Git repository and a Jenkins job is initiated. The Snyk Jenkins plugin, once it's installed and configured, finds issues and does not break the build, and the Jenkins job is successful. However, Snyk will continuously monitor the snapshot of that last build run and then alert developers using email or Slack if you have that integration set up when new issues are found. So that's using both the test and monitor in your Jenkins pipeline. Now, the second workflow involves breaking the build. So you can implement this workflow once you are at the stage where you've notified your development teams about automating processes as well as any gatekeeper policies that you've created. And so this workflow, when you actually implement the security gates, would start when a developer merges their code to a Git repository, and then a Jenkins job is initiated. The Snyk Jenkins plugin would find issues and break the build, and then Jenkins would send a notification to developers about the failed build. The developer has the option to look at the Snyk artifacts in Jenkins, which we'll be covering shortly. And then the Snyk report will include remediation advice. The developer will be able to fix the issues and then continue merging those code changes back to their Git repository, which would trigger another Jenkins job. Now the Jenkins job is successful, and then Snyk can continuously monitor the snapshot of the last build run and then alert developers of new issues via email or Slack. So something to note about the monitor function in your build pipelines is, and we'll cover this again because it's really important, but when you use the monitor command, we're creating a snapshot of your project and we're uploading the results of the scan to the web UI. So it's important to think about how you're importing projects, because when we create that snapshot, if you've also integrated Snyk with your SCM and you've imported projects that route, then you could be duplicating results in reporting, for example, by also monitoring the projects from your pipeline. So it might make more sense for your specific deployment to just use the test function and either initiate security gates now, or if you're not at that stage, just use the test function primarily for visibility. All right, now that we understand our workflow, we're going to talk about prerequisites and then just general configuration to get the plugin up and running. So I'm going to switch views here so we can kind of go through this together. Give me one moment. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, perfect. So first thing, in order to start using Snyk in Jenkins, you have to install the Snyk Security Jenkins plugin. So that can be performed from the Jenkins dashboard by first navigating to manage Jenkins. So here we are. Then selecting the manage plugins option. So we'll go ahead and select this. We'll search for the Snyk Security plugin. And then once we've found that, you can see it comes up pretty quickly. We'll want to download it, and then Jenkins will most likely have to restart. So I already have the plugin installed, but it's as easily as just finding it, the Snyk Security plugin, directly in Jenkins. Now, the next step, once the plugin is installed, we need to configure a Snyk installation. So we'll go back to the dashboard area. And then we'll want to navigate to global tool configuration. So we'll select that. And then we'll want to add a Snyk installation. So once it's been downloaded, you should see the same option down here. And then you'll configure the installation. So you'll want to also remember the name that you created here for automatically installing the latest plugin. So we'll use Snyk at latest in our build configuration in our step. Next thing that we want to do, so step 3 is to configure a Snyk API token credential. So you have 2 options for this. Number 1, you'll have to go into Snyk. If you're an org admin, you'll want to create a service account or a group admin. You'll want to create a service account specifically for this Jenkins integration and use the API token to run scans and configure the API token in Jenkins. So I've already done that. If you're more of a developer who's just trying to test this integration, you also have the option to copy your API token from your account settings and configure that token as your credentials in Jenkins. But best practice for development teams is to create a service account, and you'll have to be an org admin in Snyk to do that. Once you have your API token, either from the service account or from your account settings listed here, then you'll want to go back into Jenkins. You'll want to go back to Manage Jenkins and then click on Credentials. And then from here, you'll want to select the store. So I actually already have my API token set here, but if you were starting from scratch, you would want to select the store and then the domain. So global credentials, and then you'll want to select Add Credentials. It's important here to make sure that the ID that you created, so you'll be creating this custom name, that you remember it when you're configuring your build step as well. So we need the name of the installation for Snyk and the name of our global credentials ID when we actually go to configure our Snyk instance. All right, once we have all of that done, then it's just time to select whether or not we want to create a freestyle or pipeline project. So more on that shortly. All right, before we actually look at some examples for either configuring a freestyle project or a pipeline project, it's important to understand what our options are for actually performing build pipeline scans in Jenkins. So number one, we can run a Snyk test on every project that is run through the pipeline and then just provide additional arguments to scan for code, container, and infrastructure as code vulnerabilities. Because currently our plugin, if you just use the default installation, you'll only get the open source scans. So it's just important to note that you always need to include those additional arguments, whether it's in freestyle projects or pipeline projects. And then we can also configure our build step to fail the build by using either fail on issues equals true in pipeline projects, or if you're using the freestyle projects, you just simply have to enable failing the build and then set the severity level. Some commands I've provided for you here, like severity threshold or fail on, allows you, that's taken directly from our CLI options. So you can also use the fail on command as an additional argument if you only want to fail the build on vulnerabilities that are found that have a fix available. And then other best practice, if monitoring your projects through the pipeline instead of your SCM, is to enable the monitor function. So like I mentioned earlier, that will create a snapshot of your project and send the results to the web UI so that you can include those results as part of reporting. But one other time, it's important to note that you don't want duplicate projects. So don't turn it on if you've already imported your projects via your SCM. All right, and then also important to know as you configure your Jenkins instance that we have a few different meanings for our Snyk exit codes. So for Snyk test and Snyk monitor, exit codes signify success or failure in creating and testing the project or creating a snapshot of the project to monitor. So an exit code of 0 in your console output signifies success, so no vulnerabilities found. An exit code of 1 signifies action needing, vulnerabilities were found. And an exit code of 2 signifies a failure with the scan. Sometimes if your repository or project that we are scanning in Jenkins has file types that we don't support, then you'll most likely get an exit code of 3, which just means that we detected an unsupported file type and we were unable to scan it. All right, so now let's look at our deployment options for both freestyle projects and pipeline projects. So number one, pipeline projects. So if I go to my dashboard here, I've already configured a few different builds using both pipeline and freestyle projects. This Snyk security pipeline is my full platform pipeline project. You can see the last build run was successful. And if we look at the way we have it configured, we have a pretty large script here. So let's go through this. Number one, I'm just cloning one of my repositories in my GitHub instance to run these scans against. So my Juice Shop repository, it has a mix of code files, manifest files, Terraform files. So a good example for scanning for the full platform. Then we have our Snyk open source scanning stage. And then within the build step, we are indicating our Snyk installation, which was named Snyk at latest in my instance. And then we're also indicating our credentials for Snyk in which we created with our Snyk API token. So either the API token from your service account or the API token from your account settings. This is where the options for failing the build come in pipeline projects. So right now I'm choosing to not fail the build if vulnerabilities are found. So fail on issues is false, but I am choosing to monitor the project after the build. And then additional arguments, I've added the all projects argument, which allows me to access some subfolders depending on the dependencies that we're running. So I always like to include that if I don't know the exact dependencies in my repository. Then we have our Snyk code scan stage. So similar to our open source stage, we are indicating our Snyk installation, our credentials. And the only difference here is that we've added additional arguments to actually perform that code scan. So we have that -- code argument. And then we also have, this should actually be debug. We do have a D command that you can use when you're using the CLI to help debug, but in the Jenkins plugin, it's actually debug. So something to note there. And then we have our infrastructure as code scan as well. So we have additional arguments indicating that we'd like to perform an infrastructure as code scan. And then this -- report command, that's what creates the monitor in Snyk. And the other thing to note here is that I'm choosing to not monitor our code project after build. And that's simply because we don't have that functionality yet for code. So everything else, all other projects you'll be able to monitor except code. So IAC, if you want to create that snapshot and send results to the web UI, make sure to include the -- report command. And then lastly, for container scanning, you can either run a -- container command. This is just to access images that I have available. Or you can actually indicate the image name here for running container scans. So it's useful to actually look at what commands are available for our test commands. So for container, this is just a cheat sheet that is helpful for quickly running all of these different tests in your pipelines. But specifically for container, you can run a Snyk container test with the image name. You can include the -- file and then path to the Docker file, or just indicate Docker file. So just a few options there for additional commands you can add to that container command. All right, let's see where I was here. All right, here we go. So this script I can make available for all of you if necessary. Just, yeah, let me know or drop in the chat if you'd like me to paste this, at least for these stages, so that you can try and test it in your own environment. And that pretty much covers everything that you need to do for the pipeline script. Just kind of plugging this, these stages into this area and then testing that build. So the other thing to note, if we go back to our Snyk security, and yeah, seems like one person wants me to share, so I'll paste that in the chat for you all at the end. But after the build step has run, if we click our last build step or our last successful build, we also have artifacts that are generated. So each of these Snyk reports are reports that your developers or yourselves can leverage after the build runs to review vulnerability information directly in Jenkins. So I can click on the Snyk security report. That first test report is all of our open source dependencies and vulnerabilities in our packages. And then we also have, the second one will be all of our code report results. So you can see where the vulnerability starts, where it ends, and kind of see the whole data flow and affected file. And then we also have the report for infrastructure as code. So this is looking at vulnerabilities in our Terraform files. And then lastly, the results of that container scan. So looking at package manager Debian 12. So yeah, once that's successful, you'll have access to those artifacts. That's the information that you would leverage to start fixing issues and make sure you get your issues fixed before you try to push any of those code changes to production. So the other thing that we want to review is freestyle projects. So it acts a little different than pipeline projects where you're actually creating a script and indicating the stage and configuring additional arguments to make it pretty customized. With the freestyle projects, it's more of a user interface. So I'll go ahead and jump to my Snyk full platform scan here. And then we'll look at the configuration. So the configuration for freestyle projects, once you've created the freestyle project, you have the name, you'll have to create a specific build step for Snyk. So here you can see we're invoking a Snyk security task. And then our options for failing the build rather than having that argument in like our pipeline script, all we have to do is just toggle failing the build on, and then we can set the severity level of what should be failed. So right now, if we set it too high, then any vulnerabilities that are high or critical, the build will fail if those vulnerabilities are found. And then we also need to indicate the credentials that we created. So the name of our credentials for our API token, and then our Snyk installation. And then as you can see, this first build step, I have no additional arguments because this is going to be for our open source scan, which is just automatically built into the plugin. Now, if I wanted to also start running that second scan for code, I would need to include the additional arguments. So just -- code, include our installation and our API token, decide whether or not I want to fail the build, or even monitor the project after the build. Since I'm monitored from my pipeline project, I'm going to choose not to monitor the same project from my freestyle projects. So all of that is turned on, but maybe in the interest of keeping things uniform, I'll go ahead and set failing the build to high as well. And then down here, we have our infrastructure as code argument. So that's going to run any infrastructure as code tests. And then we can add an additional step for container as well. So just invoke the Snyk security task, set our API token, make sure our Snyk installation is specified, and then provide the container command. And then I'll, if you have the image name, you can provide that here as well. Then you can just select save and apply. Now, freestyle projects, the information you're going to get is going to be very similar to what we saw with our pipeline projects. So you'll have a Snyk security report. You'll be able to look at the console output. So if you're using the debug command and run into any issues, that will give you some visibility there as well. So if we click Snyk security port, same information for our open source vulnerability results. And then we can go to code and then infrastructure as code. Since we didn't have that container scan, we only have those 3 reports. Now, something I haven't shown you yet is what it looks like after the monitor is complete in the Snyk web UI. So if I go to my instance and I go to projects, you can see I have that same Juice Shop repository project that's been imported a few different ways. So one through GitHub, one through GitLab. And then I also have a CLI imported project. So this is all coming from the Jenkins pipeline. So if I remove this, now we're just looking at the CI or CLI monitored projects. So I can expand this, and then you can see that I have my open source projects that are being monitored from that last build run, my infrastructure as code projects that are being monitored, and then my container project as well. Now, the only thing we're missing here is the code analysis project, and that's because, like I mentioned, we don't have the monitor capability yet for code scans. All right, and so we have about 4 minutes left. Just wanted to let you know that a lot of the information I covered in this session We have links to both our Jenkins plugin repository, so you can follow the same steps. We have links back to the Jenkins plugin in our Snyk user docs. This will be really important for understanding your options for additional arguments. So there is a section here that kind of tells you all of the different parameters that you can pass into your Snyk security step. So fail on issues, fail on error, monitor project on build, like we discussed. You can even specify which organization the project should be tested and monitored against. And then you can even create a custom name for your project as well, and then set the minimum severity levels to block the build. So just something to note there. Hopefully these will all be helpful for you as you start to create your own instance in Jenkins. Now let me paste the different stages you need for running those scans. So I'll start with our build stage and end with our deploy stage. And I'll drop that in the chat for everyone. Oops, go ahead and stop sharing. And then any questions? I don't see any questions yet, but happy to take them if you have them. Oops. Sorry, having a hard time pasting this script. Let me try one more time.
Hey, Rima, we do have one question from Juan of where are the reports stored and how long are they kept? And then also in the follow-up email I'll send out with the recording, we can include the script there.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so if you're talking about the reports in Snyk, so the results, let me go ahead and share my screen really quick. So the results from the CLI monitored scans will be included in the reports, the reporting area in your Snyk instance. So you'll have that information. The other way that reports are stored is just directly in the, after the build has been performed in the Snyk security report. So those are two ways that you can access the vulnerability results. And if the monitor is part of your deployment because you haven't imported those projects via your SCM, then you really can have just like a full pipeline deployment and have the results, except for code, stored and just continuously monitor the project status for any new vulnerabilities. And then, yeah, sorry, we don't, if you don't see the text in the chat, like Maddie mentioned, we'll send that out in the email as well. I was just having some issues pasting that. All right. Any other questions? Did that answer your question, Juan? All right.
Oh, wait, I think we have one person. Hey, Juan, I see your hand is raised, so you can come off mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I was asking is the Snyk security reports, are they that you're running through the Jenkins, are they stored locally or are they stored on the Snyk web?
Yeah, they're stored in both the web UI if you're using the monitor, but they're also stored in the Jenkins web UI, specifically here. Oh, sorry, I'm not sharing anymore. Specifically right here under Snyk security report. I do believe there's a way that you can store it locally in like a JSON or Serif output. So it might take a little bit of playing around, but that's in our CLI options if you want to generate that report. I'll drop this in the chat for you.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Just drop the CLI information in the chat for you all. And yeah, if no other questions, thanks so much for joining me today. And yeah, I hope this helped and you get your Jenkins instance up and running as well.